The winning blueprint presents
In the Lab Room.
While you're here, go ahead and sub up. Welcome. You are in the lab room. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me. Today we find out what's new in Pittsburgh with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this is courtesy of YouTube subscriber Cubone Studios. Got them in. We're coming down the stretch now. And then there were four. So if you want to see one of the remaining four teams in any particular order, simply be the first to leave a comment at the bottom of this video stating next and the team you would like to see next. And as I said before, there's only four teams left for this segment. So if you want to see the Falcons, Saints, Colts, or Titans, be the first to leave one of those four remaining teams at the bottom of this video so we can finish up this series. With that being said, we want to find out what's new in Pittsburgh, the steel curtain. A lot of things have transpired over this offseason, but in typical Pittsburgh Steelers fashion, there's really not many wholesale changes. A couple of players leaving here, a couple of players leaving there, a couple of players coming in, but for the most part, it's relatively quiet in Pittsburgh. That's the way they do it. Despite not making the postseason last year, it's not a lot of changes in Pittsburgh. That's just not the way they run their operation. So we'll look at what's new in Pittsburgh. But of course, in order to take a look at what's new, you got to get rid of the old in Pittsburgh. And so that's where we'll start first, out with the old in Pittsburgh. In order to go out with the old and with the new, of course, you know how we do this here in the lab room. I need the assistance. And not only my big boards you see behind me, but of course my handy dandy pointer. I've got both. That means it's time to talk Pittsburgh Steelers football. Let's get to the big board and do some damage here. We start out with the old, and I just mentioned to you that there are no wholesale changes in Pittsburgh. So Mike Tomlin, still the man in charge as the head coach. Offensive coordinator Todd Haley back for seconds in Pittsburgh, as well as defensive coordinator Dick LeBeau. Nothing's changed in Pittsburgh except the names on the back of the jersey, so let's talk about some of that. Quarterback Charlie Batch, a veteran quarterback that I thought the Steelers, and look, let's talk about both. Let's just lump both of these quarterbacks in together, like crab meat. Let's just lump them together. Quarterback Charlie Batch, quarterback Byron Leftwich. Two veteran backup quarterbacks that I just thought the Steelers hung on to way too long. They were comfortable with both Batch and Leftwich, and that's fine. It's okay to be comfortable with the backup. Except in Pittsburgh, it's not a normal situation. Ben Roethlisberger gets injured often, more so than most quarterbacks in the league because he's a guy that takes punishment. His offensive line has not been consistent for about 5 years. And also, Ben Roethlisberger is a guy that loves to extend plays, hold on to the football. And so when you do that, you're going to take some shots. And Ben Roethlisberger has taken shots over in the life of his career to this point, and he gets injured. It's just a matter of the fact. He gets injured. And so it's just the fact of the matter. He gets injured. And you got to have guys that you trust behind that quarterback. And in this situation, those guys were Batch and Leftwich. Now, it's okay to trust these guys, but at the end of the day, you need guys that can get it done. And I think Byron Leftwich is solid. I think he's a guy that you can win with in this league in short periods and spells, which is what you're looking for from a backup. But Byron Leftwich himself is an injury liability. That's part of the reason why this guy's a backup, because he can't stay healthy himself. You can't trust Byron Leftwich to stay healthy. And it showed in Pittsburgh on numerous occasions. This guy hasn't been able to stay healthy, and the Steelers have had to turn to Charlie Batch. Well, Charlie Batch is a marginal player at this point in his career. This guy's been around for like 16, 17 seasons, has Charlie Batch. And so Charlie Batch can't do what you need him to do anymore. It's really simple. And I thought the Steelers hung on to these two guys for way too long as backup. At this point, they should have already had a young quarterback that they were grooming, or even a veteran quarterback that's a lot younger than these two that they could rely on in the event of Ben Roethlisberger going down. And every team needs that quarterback that they can break the glass in case of an emergency and pull them out. For the Steelers, those two guys in Batch and Leftwich simply to me were too old and too injury prone. And at this point in their careers, not going to get it done for you in situations when you need someone to step in for a 4 or a 6 week stretch because Roethlisberger has a concussion. Roethlisberger has a high ankle sprain. Roethlisberger sprained his knee. Whatever the case may be, you need someone to step in. These guys have been around a little bit too long. And I think they found that out in 2012. You insert Leftwich, and he does something that is uncommon to him. He runs for a touchdown and injures himself. I mean, he didn't even get touched, and he got injured. And that's the kind of stuff that happens with Byron Leftwich. Byron Leftwich is a guy that just gets injured. Charlie Batch just can't produce at that level you need him to anymore. And so neither one of these guys are back. Charlie Batch has retired, Leftwich no longer on his roster, and I think it's a good move. It's overdue, is what it is in Pittsburgh, but nonetheless, neither one of these guys are here. Now you need to find yourself a worthy backup. We'll talk about that in a little bit. You look at running back Rashard Mendenhall. This is a running back that got in the doghouse of head coach Mike Tomlin. And Rashard Mendenhall was an outspoken guy, says what he feels, and sometimes it stirs up a little bit of drama in Pittsburgh. And we know the Pittsburgh Steelers organization is a drama-free work environment. You don't get a lot of fodder in Pittsburgh. They keep it relatively quiet, much like the Patriots. Hey, keep your mouth closed, come to work hard, do your job, go home. And Rashard Mendenhall was a guy that, hey, if the spirit hit him, he'd say a little something. Maybe post a little something that's controversial on Twitter. And you combine that with some of the things on the field that Mike Tomlin may not have liked. Here's a guy with ball security issues, someone that I can't say what his work ethic was like because I don't know, and I don't know firsthand. Haven't really heard anybody say, hey, this guy's lazy, yada, yada, yada. But I tell you what, he had to have done some other things. I can't fathom that this is just because of him being vocal out in the public eye or him posting things on Twitter that were unfavorable to the Steelers. It has to be something else that really ticked Mike Tomlin off to put this guy in the doghouse. Maybe it's just a fumbling issue. Everyone remembers the fumble in the Super Bowl against the Packers. I thought that was the game changer. That's when the game changed in that Super Bowl. The Steelers were on their way to winning that game, I think. And then Rashard Mendenhall coughs it up. The tide turned in that game. Steelers lose the football game. So maybe the fumbling was the issue. Whatever it was, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, Rashard Mendenhall was basically casted off of this football team. He was phased out. And it's not like this guy was a huge difference maker. Look, he was the best back that you had on your football team. There's no disputing that. Even though Jonathan Dwyer started to play better football, even though Isaac Redman is a jack of all trades, he was the best thing you had on the team in terms of running back. But at the same time, after he tore that ACL, things weren't the same in Pittsburgh with Rashard Mendenhall and head coach Mike Tomlin. And I don't know if something was already bubbling under the surface and festering before that injury, and that injury just made it that much easier to say, hey, I don't want this guy on my roster anymore, or what the case was, but it doesn't matter. Rashard Mendenhall was a solid back, but he wasn't a true difference maker. And I don't want Steelers fans to think that this guy would have made a huge difference had he been playing. And when he got carries in 2012, he fumbled. We all remember the running back by committee fumbling fiesta that the Steelers had against Cleveland Browns that led to a loss in Cleveland. It just isn't really fair to the coaching staff in Pittsburgh to say, hey, we should still have Rashard Mendenhall, and he's a guy that can make a difference. I don't think you're going to miss Rashard Mendenhall that much. It's not like this guy had speed, which is what the Steelers are missing out of that backfield. Rashard Mendenhall is now in Arizona. He'll get a chance to resurrect his career. We'll see what he does. He's a relatively young man. We'll see how it fares for him in Arizona. He's no longer in Pittsburgh. You look at wide receiver Mike Wallace. 60 minutes. And it seemed like that's how long he was in Pittsburgh for, before he started asking for money. And it's okay when you're a guy that's one of the fastest receivers in the league. And I myself feel like Mike Wallace was a one-trick pony in Pittsburgh. He could go deep. I mean, and that's a commodity that you want to have on your football team. If you're going to be a one-trick pony, all I ask is that you be really good at your one trick. And Mike Wallace was really good at that one trick. But he's out to prove to other people, guys around the league, pundits, that, hey, I'm not a one-trick pony. And I think he can do that. Do I think that Mike Wallace is the guy you want going over the middle of the field? No, I don't. I don't think you want Mike Wallace running a shallow post. I don't think you want Mike Wallace running a 15-yard dig route over the middle of the field. But running drags and crossers and slants and outs, sure, Mike Wallace can do those things. But where Mike Wallace is going to make his money and where he made his money in this offseason is the 9 route. Talking about that fly, that go route. Running by defenders as if they're standing still. That's what Mike Wallace brings to the table. Speed! You can't teach it. You either got it or you don't. And Mike Wallace has plenty of it to burn. Now, his contractual situation was not the most ideal in Pittsburgh. We know about the holdout in 2012 prior to that season. I think that it affected him on the field. I thought it took him a while because, again, you had a new offensive coordinator in Todd Haley coming in last season. And so it was a new playbook, new things being implemented, and he wasn't there for a lot of that early on. He missed out. It took him a while to get into the swing of things. I think he was thinking about his contract more than anything else. So if a big hit was coming, if it was looming, Mike didn't want to go near it. Dropped a few passes in 2012, uncharacteristically of Mike Wallace, and I didn't think he was always focused. And I thought that he lagged behind the rest of the team because he wasn't up to par with the playbook. And I thought his production suffered a little bit. You look at his numbers, and they're not that far off from where he's been in his career. But if you watch the game and the flow of the game and how Mike Wallace was involved, you weren't really sure if this guy was mentally engaged in the game the way he needed to be. At the end of the day, I think relationships were severed in Pittsburgh with that contract situation. I think Mike Wallace felt underappreciated in Pittsburgh, and he wanted to be the guy. And I don't know if he was ever going to be respected enough to be the guy in Pittsburgh. So he went looking elsewhere, found that money in Miami. He's now a Dolphin, no longer a Steeler. And you'll find another guy that can run. But will you find another guy that can run and catch the football the way Mike Wallace did? We'll see. But no more Mike Wallace in Pittsburgh. We start now with tight end Leonard Pope. Big, tall, lumbering tight end. 6'8" guy. Has been in this league for about 7 or 8 years. I look at Leonard Pope and I say, you are very stiff. You are very unathletic. You are very average in this league. For his height, you'd want him to be really good at something. Hey, look, just block really good. Just catch the ball really good. Do something really good. At 6'8", 265, Leonard Pope does nothing extremely well. Doesn't really catch the ball, doesn't scare you as an option out of the backfield. Not really going to dominate you in the blocking game either. But that's the purpose he really served in Pittsburgh. Hey, an extra guy out there to block when we put extra tight ends on the field. He was solid in that regard, I guess. He's no longer on your roster. You're not going to miss Leonard Pope. You have plenty of tight ends, and you went out and got one to replace him and his production on this football team. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Offensive guard, Willie Colon. One of these very marginal offensive line players that has been in and out of Pittsburgh for years. Seems like Willie Colon and Max Starks, much like your two backup quarterbacks. Let me lump these two in with each other. Like crab meat. Just lump them together. Guard, Willie Colon. Tackle, Max Starks. You look at these two, and these have been two players that have been part of the problem in Pittsburgh. At times, they've been extremely solid. Many a times, they've been injured. And even when they're healthy, they're iffy sometimes. And they've been part of the problem on this Pittsburgh Steelers line. Guys that you can't really trust to A, stay healthy, and B, be consistent in pass blocking situations. Now, you could blame some of it on Ben Roethlisberger, and you should, but a lot of the onus falls on this offensive line, and these guys have been part of the problem for a very long time in Pittsburgh. Once again, the Steelers, I felt, held on to some of these guys for a little bit longer than you would have liked. Max Starks, he wasn't a starter anymore. He wasn't a guy that you were relying on, but it seemed like players kept getting injured in Pittsburgh. Every time you turn around, a Steeler offensive lineman was getting injured. You get David DeCastro and you're thinking, yeah, this guy's going to man up one of these guard positions. Yes, he gets injured. You don't even really get to see what David DeCastro can do for you. He gets injured for the whole season in the preseason. So a guy like Willie Colon, who maybe was going to start, maybe not, at least you had the option. He has to play now. You don't have an option anymore. Look at Matt Starks, and you're looking for Mike Adams to come in, really give you some work on one of these tackle positions. Preferably left if he can handle it, but okay, we'll start you off with right, kind of get your feet wet, see what's going on. He gets injured too, and he's battling injuries, and all of a sudden a guy like Max Starks is thrust into action again. Tell you what, in Pittsburgh, that's the way it always has been over the last 5 years. You just can't keep guys healthy, and so guys like Willie Colon and Max Starks stuck around longer than you probably would have liked and had to play more than you probably would have liked as well. But it doesn't matter. Neither of these guys are on your roster anymore. Willie Colon now a New York Jet, and Max Starks now in San Diego. So both of these guys gone off of your roster. And it's time for this Steelers offensive line to start anew. Start fresh. Get a couple of free agents, get some guys in the draft, coach them up, and put them on the field and see what this offensive line can be. Because it's obvious that what you have had at the offensive line position isn't good enough. It just isn't. So we move on to center Doug Legursky. Here's a very versatile offensive lineman that you figured out was versatile by force. You didn't have a choice. Doug Legursky, at first glance, looks like a long snapper. But yet, you have to put him in the game because your center position was banged up. He plays center, does it effectively. You don't really have many complaints. Okay, Pouncey goes down. You need a center to fill in. Pouncey comes back. Now one of your guards are hurt. No, now two of your guards are hurt. Okay, now we're desperate. Doug Legursky has to kick over the guard. Hey, he does a bang-up job. Not the best, not the worst either. And you realize, hey, this guy is someone that really has helped us out over the last couple of years. When injuries have ravaged this offensive line, a guy like Doug Legursky has shown his versatility, been able to play multiple positions on this offensive line, and he was very useful to us. But when you show the versatility of a player, guess what? Other teams around the league take notice as well. The Buffalo Bills noticed what Doug Legursky could do in multiple positions that he could play. They decided, hey, that's a guy worth having on this roster. Well, now Doug Legursky is in Buffalo. You look at safety Will Allen. Here's a guy that is a career backup. Started out in Tampa Bay, came over, played for you guys in Pittsburgh, and has done a bang-up job at the safety position as a rotational depth player. But in 2012, injuries hit this Pittsburgh Steelers team, and it seems like I'm a broken record right now. I keep repeating myself, but injuries have definitely hit this team. And what you'll find is when you're an older football team, injuries start to mound. They start to add up. And when you have an older football team, that toe injury, that ankle injury, that bruised elbow. All of these things that usually heal in a week or two when you're a young man, something you might be able to play through. It's not as easy to come back from when you're getting up there in age, and I think the Steelers, for all the good that they do as a franchise, I thought they hung on to some of these players for too long. And that's why a lot of these guys got banged up. And they play a very tough brand of football. When you're a tough physical team, it wears on you. It takes its toll. And that's why you got to start rotating the guys that you have on this roster. You can't allow guys to stick around because this tough, hard-nosed approach to the game, and everyone plays hard around the National Football League, but the Steelers play a certain brand of football. Tough, smash mouth, nasty, Pittsburgh Steelers football. Year in, year out. And it wears on you. It takes a toll on your body. You want to know why a guy like Marion Barber III retired early from the National Football League? You know why? Because he played a tough brand of football. Tougher than most backs in the National Football League. I mean, this guy didn't go down on first contact. He was looking for contact. He ran tough. He ran hard. But guess what? That kind of style of running takes a toll on you. Ask Earl Campbell, one of the toughest runners in the National Football League ever. It takes a toll on your body when you're physical that way. And that's how the Steelers are. And so you got to make sure that you're ahead of the curve, that you get rid of guys earlier than when they start to break down and now it's too late. Now you have to pay, and I thought in 2012 the Steelers paid for hanging on to guys too long, like in the safety position. And I'm not saying that these guys don't need to be on roster, but the injuries started catching up with you. The tough play started catching up with you. Troy Polamalu's body is starting to break down. He plays a reckless style of football, reckless abandon, throws his body around. Everyone loves it, but it's going to take a toll on you. Troy Polamalu missed essentially all of the 2012 season. And Ryan Clark wasn't much better. He was banged up a lot in 2012, and he's a tough, hard-nosed safety as well. And so a guy like Will Allen had to play a lot of football. And let's just do this again. I think this is working well for me right now. So safety Ryan Mundy, let's just lump him in like crab meat with Will Allen as well. These two guys had to play a lot more than you're comfortable with them having to play on the field. Ryan Mundy, another backup safety, but again, he got himself a couple of starts in 2012 because of the injury. Clark was out. Of course, we know about Polamalu. That was well documented in 2012. Guys were missing games, and they had to step up. And for the first time in his career, Will Allen was asked to start. And I thought he did an okay job, but he's no Troy Polamalu. And it's unfair to have to kind of compare him with him, but that's who he was replacing in the lineup, and it showed. But when you're a desperate football team like the Dallas Cowboys are for safety help, you'll take anything. They saw Will Allen play a little bit for the Steelers. They got to see him close up. Steelers played the Cowboys, and they felt like, hey, this is a guy that can help us. They went out, snatched Will Allen off the roster. He's now in Big D. You look at Ryan Mundy, same deal here. They saw a little bit more of Ryan Mundy, that being the Giants, than they normally have seen over the years. And Ryan Mundy has had to do some spot starting. And that's the kind of player that he is, a spot starter in this league. But he had to play more and more because of the injuries at that safety position. Guys are getting up there in age and they play a tough, hard style of football. Ryan Mundy is now in New York with the Giants. And so it's not a bad thing that you're losing some of these veterans on your football team because frankly, the Steelers need to infuse this roster with more young, talented football players. For too long, they've been holding on, and it's almost like loyalty catching up with these guys. Hey, I know you want to be loyal, and that's what this Steelers organization has been about for decades. Loyalty and honoring that Pittsburgh Steelers tradition. But sometimes you got to know when to cut the bait and know, hey, this guy's been on this team for 9 years. He's been really productive, but I see the writing on the wall. I see the skills starting to decline and wane better now than later. And a lot of people give the Patriots flack for that, including myself. Sometimes I think it's unjustified in New England when they do it the Patriot way. But this is almost the other end of the spectrum. Sometimes they do it way too early in New England. Now the Steelers are doing it way too late. Of course, I'm referring to getting rid of players. Got to know when to cut your losses with some of these aging veterans. You look at cornerback Keenan Lewis. Here's a young guy that you should have held on to, and you wanted to hold on to, but Keenan Lewis got a pretty good payday in New Orleans. There's really nothing you can do about it. If you're not willing to match in this league, you gotta get paid when you can get paid. And much like William Gay leaving in free agency a couple of years ago to Arizona, you lose a young corner that's playing his best football going into the prime of his career, and you're hoping that this guy doesn't go off and become a star in this league as a cornerback for the New Orleans Saints, because it'll eat away at you if you're the Steelers. Because Keenan Lewis was probably your most consistent cornerback in 2012, especially with Ike Taylor, and here we go again, being banged up for most of the 2012 season. Keenan Lewis stepped up, and I thought he was going to get paid in Pittsburgh. Not the case. He goes to New Orleans. Let's see what he does with the Saints. He's no longer a Pittsburgh Steeler. You look at linebacker James Harrison. He's one of those guys that maybe, just maybe, and I'm not saying, I'm just saying, maybe you held on to him a little bit too long, Harrison. And again, much like the rest of these Steelers, hard-nosed approach to the game. Tough. But the injuries are starting to mount. And he missed essentially all of the 2012 season as well. Wow, I really seem like I'm a broken record right now. Like I'm just, you know how that needle keeps running over that part of the record, that scratch? I feel like I'm doing it. I keep saying guys were injured. No wonder this team was 8-8 last year. Wow. So you look at James Harrison and you're like, can this guy get pressure on the quarterback anymore? I'm not sure. I don't think he's the 12 and a half, 13 sack guy anymore. I don't think he's the 10 and a half sack guy anymore. Maybe he can get you 8.5, but that's not the James Harrison you've come to know and love. The guy that you had on this roster that was a difference maker, that made huge plays for you in the Super Bowl, was the guy that you knew was going to put up double-digit sacks before the season started. A guy that was just going to be a menace all over the football. Not sure if he can be that guy anymore. Not sure if he can be that aggressive force of nature that he's been throughout his career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And maybe you held on to him too long. Maybe you didn't. That one is debatable because you couldn't have foreseen these injuries hitting him as hard as they did over the last couple of seasons, but they did. And you got out of the James Harrison business. And I think it was the right thing to do for the amount of money that he was scheduled to make. I thought it was a move you had to make. When you did it, he's now sleeping with the enemy in Cincinnati. Tough break for the Pittsburgh Steelers because now you got to see this guy 2 times a season. And if he is still playing well, and if he is highly motivated to make the Steelers pay, it could be a nightmare for you. We'll see. Look at nose tackle Casey Hampton. Here's another example of a guy that I thought you held on to. This is probably the most prime example of what I'm referring to. Holding on to aging veterans too long. Casey Hampton probably should have been off this roster 2 seasons ago. Honestly. I mean, he's just out there. And in the National Football League now, you won't find many space-eating defensive tackles who are just in the way anymore. Teams really don't have those guys. You remember when the league was full of these guys? Ted Washingtons and Pat Williams and guys like that that were huge, that were 350 pounds plus. They didn't move a lot, and they were just in the way. It was hard to get around these guys because they were immovable because they were huge, and they just took up a lot of space. That's why you call them space eaters. Casey Hampton could no longer move. He wasn't a guy that was going to get pressure on the quarterback. He wasn't going to work his way down the defensive line to make a tackle out on the edges. No. If you ran up the middle, Casey Hampton was going to be in the way. But after a while, you need guys that are athletic. And I thought, like, over time, the Steelers would realize that, and a guy like McClendon would be in the game. Taking over, would get the lion's share of the starter snaps, and play a lot more. And you'd find another guy, and that would be your basis for what you're doing at the nose tackle position. Then you got another defensive tackle, Alameda Ta'afu, and I said, okay, those are your 2 guys, McClendon and Ta'afu, boom. Those are the guys you're going to run with. Look, it took 3 years after I said that to get Casey Hampton off the roster. And I'm speechless here because I don't know why he was still on the roster. I didn't think he made that big of a difference. He was that big of an impact guy. And you can find nose tackles around this league. Now, are they going to be dominant as Casey Hampton once was for this football team? No. But Casey Hampton isn't even dominant anymore himself. And you can't live off of the glory days. Guys get older, guys become less productive, and when they become dead weight, they hold this team down like an anchor. And I thought Casey Hampton wasn't really a guy that you could rely on anymore as someone that could make plays for you on his defensive line. And it was time for him to go a while ago. Now you're finally getting around to it. It's almost like that document that's on your desk waiting to be signed. And you keep saying, hey, I'll sign it. I'll sign it. And you never got around to it. It's like Casey Hampton was that guy that should have been released a while ago, but you never got around to it. Now you finally say, hey, this document's been on my desk long enough. It's time I sign it. He's been on this roster long enough. It's time you let him go. And that's finally where you are with nose tackle Casey Hampton. He's no longer on your roster. And he's had a good run in Pittsburgh, done a human-like service to this franchise, but it was time for Casey Hampton to go. You look at punter Jeremy Kapanos. Solid punter. You can do better, and you will. We'll see who's your punter in 2013. Really not a lot to say about that situation. And so you look at out with the old, and we're literally out with the old in Pittsburgh. Literally out with the old. Now let's go in with the new with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you go in with the new with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it's a breath of fresh air. You need new, you need change in Pittsburgh. Not at the top. A lot of people seem to think Mike Tomlin is in trouble. That's a topic for a different day, and that's a discussion that we will go into thoroughly down the road. Don't want to do that here though, but I will say this. You look at this Steelers operation and the way they run it, it's almost like a neighborhood where only people that grew up in that neighborhood are welcome. And you look at the Steelers and how they do this thing, not a lot of guys from the outside come in to Pittsburgh that often. It's usually guys that are homegrown that they drafted or guys that they're comfortable with that they've had on this roster for a long time. Let's go into this team with me. And you look at quarterback Bruce Gradkowski, and this is a huge pickup for you because again, you got rid of some of these old aging backups, guys that can't stay healthy anymore. And you need to replace those guys because you know that at any moment Ben Roethlisberger could be injured, and you got to have somebody you trust to come into the game and hold it down for you for maybe a 6-week stretch, maybe a 4-week stretch, whatever the case may be. You need someone to come in. Bruce Gradkowski, I think, has proven over time that he's a more than capable backup in this league, and I think he's a solid guy that you don't mind having as a backup quarterback in this league, and I think he's going to prove very handy for you on this football team. You look at quarterback John Parker Wilson, and here's a young guy that wants the opportunity to stick in this league. I don't think he's going to make this roster. I think the Steelers are going to carry 3 quarterbacks. It's a must in Pittsburgh that you carry 3 quarterbacks with Ben Roethlisberger as your starter because, again, like I just said, in any given moment, he can go down. And we saw last year what happened with the Steelers when Roethlisberger can't play, Leftwich goes down the very next game, and Charlie Batch has to play. You got to have 3 quarterbacks on your roster if you are the Steelers. And so, as they say, you're only one hit away. And with the drafting of quarterback Landry Jones, a guy like John Parker Wilson probably won't make this roster. Bruce Gradkowski is going to be on this roster. He's going to be your backup in 2013. Landry Jones is going to make this roster. You're not going to put him on the practice squad because someone else will snatch him up. So that's not an option. He'll be on this roster. He'll be your 3rd quarterback. And so John Parker Wilson is the guy. Even though he's coming over onto this football team, he's got a shot. He won't make this roster. You look at running back Lerod Stevens-Howard. I love this acquisition for the Pittsburgh Steelers because he brings something to the table that the Steelers currently lack and have lacked for a very long time now. I know that you had Chris Rainey, but he didn't work out. He wasn't a Steeler. He couldn't keep his nose clean off the field. The Steelers don't really deal well with players who can't keep their personal life and their football life on the straight and narrow. And so he was gone. And that was the one guy that you had with speed. So now Rod Stevens-Howland comes over from Arizona, and this guy can move. He can run. He can do some things out of the backfield catching the football, much like a Mewelde Moore for you a couple years back. He can really catch the football for you out of the backfield, and he'll really help you not only in the passing game, but as a guy that you can give the football to and have him do some things after he gets it in his hands from the running back position. A guy that, hey, if he gets the lane, he can go the distance, and that's something you've been missing, an element of speed that you've been missing in Pittsburgh for far too long. So, good pickup by the Pittsburgh Steelers in the Rod Stevens-Howland. Tight end, Matt Spaeth. This is a guy that's a blocking tight end. You get rid of Leonard Pope, you need to replace that production as a blocking tight end. Enter Matt Spaeth. Here's a guy that went to Chicago in free agency, is now coming back home to Pittsburgh, and this is what I'm talking about. Guys that, if you're not from here, you're not welcome, it seems like. And of course, I'm overstating this. I'm taking it to that next level, but here's Matt Spaeth, a guy that not going to really catch the football a lot, going to block for you very well, very effective in that manner. And so he's back on your roster. You look at tackle, Guy Wimper, coming over from Jacksonville. You lose Matt Starks, a veteran. You replace him with another veteran tackle in Guy Wimper. Not sure what you're looking for out of Guy Wimper. He's a guy that can start. Do you want him starting? Probably not. Probably not. But he's a guy that in a pinch can start for you. I think he'll definitely provide depth on his offensive line because he can play left or right tackle. I don't think you really want him on the left side per se. I think he's more of a right tackle at this point of his career. But we'll see what you have in store for a guy like Guy Wimper. You look at cornerback, William Gay. Here's another guy you're welcoming home. I talked about William Gay earlier, leaving for greener pastures in Arizona. The money was right. The price was right in Arizona. He left Pittsburgh when he was playing his best football, arguably. He goes to Arizona. It does not work out. He did not play consistent football in Arizona. He's back home. He's back home. In Pittsburgh, we'll see if they can get the best out of William Gay once again, like they did once upon a time. You look at punter Brian Moorman. Wasn't a huge fan of him in Dallas a season ago. Thought he was very inconsistent. Had some good games, had some horrendous games. We'll see. I don't think Jeremy Papinos was doing enough for you in the punting game. You're looking for a guy like Brian Moorman to come in and really put a stranglehold on this punter position in 2013. We'll see. He's probably going to be competing with other punchers for that position on this football team. So you go from the end with the new portion, and it's very light. That's how the Steelers usually keep it. They normally take care of their own in Pittsburgh. And so not a lot here. You move on to where the Steelers do a lot of their damage. And that's usually with young guys in terms of undrafted, rookie free agents, and draft picks. They do have a lot of younger guys on their roster through the Steelers. It's just that it usually takes them a long time in Pittsburgh to crack the starting lineup, to crack this roster in terms of playing time. And it's okay to have guys on your roster, but if they're not playing, if they're not producing, they're not helping you. And look, injuries, you can't foresee them, you can't forecast them. You don't really know. You get a guy like Sean Spence that you feel really good about. What happens? He gets injured, misses the whole 2012 season. It happens, and there's nothing you can do about that. So, in one breath, you say, hey, they need more young guys, a more infusion of young talent. And then on the other hand, you say, well, guys just aren't staying healthy. David DeCastro goes down, doesn't play essentially for you in 2012. So does Sean Spence. These are two guys that you were relying on to come in and help you as younger players on this football team. Neither one of them could produce for you in 2012. And so it's just been a tough break for the Steelers. Tough go of it over the last couple of years. So we go to draft picks now. And if you're looking for an extensive breakdown of the Steelers draft or any other team in the National Football League, I will turn you over to the 2013 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series. I've done every team. I've broken down each and every single player taken in the draft for every team in the National Football League. It's an extensive and thorough breakdown. If you're looking for that, I will redirect you there. 2013 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series. So Linebacker Jarvis Jones in the first round. He's a guy that I think is going to start for you day one. I hear a lot of Steelers saying, hey, he's going to have to earn it. This guy's going to start for you at outside linebacker. You need pressure on the quarterback, and this guy can deliver it for you. Running back Le'Veon Bell, I wasn't a huge fan of this pick. I won't go into it. If you want my opinion, 2013 NFL Draft wrap-up. But second round pick out of Michigan State, running back Le'Veon Bell. Wide receiver Marcus Wheaton, third round out of Oklahoma State, can fly. Safety Shamarko Thomas in the fourth round. Quarterback Landry Jones in the fourth round. Cornerback Terry Hawthorne in the fifth round. Wide receiver Justin Brown in the sixth round. Linebacker Vince Williams as well in the sixth round, and rounding out your draft, defensive tackle Nick Williams in the seventh round. And so I expect this to be a huge draft for the Pittsburgh Steelers, because I look at a lot of these guys up and down this list, and if they pan out, if they work out, this Steelers team could be really set for many years to come. I mean, these are all positions of need for the Steelers. You look at what happened at the safety position last year with Clark and Polamalu. When you look at losing Will Allen and Ryan Mundy, guys who started for you in the absence of your starting safety, a guy like Shamarko Thomas going to be huge in his development. You look at a guy like Marcus Wheaton. You got Antonio Brown, and I love Antonio Brown, but Mike Wallace was the speed demon on the team. Got to replace that. That's what Marcus Wheaton is going to look to be for you. You look at linebacker Jarvis Jones. You just got rid of a guy like James Harrison. You need someone to get to the quarterback opposite of Lamar Woodley, who struggled in that capacity himself last year, who dealt with injury. Enter Jarvis Jones. So this is going to be a huge draft. You lose a guy like cornerback Keenan Lewis. You're hoping that some of these other cornerbacks that you already have on your roster, you have a couple of young guys that you're hoping step up. But corner Terry Hawthorne could be another guy that could be in that mix that maybe you get a lot out of. Who knows? I mean, you look at this draft, and there are a lot of players that, if they could help you in the next 2 or 3 seasons, would be great. And I think this is going to be a big draft for the Steelers in the next 4 or 5 seasons. You'll really be able to look back at that 2013 draft and say, hey, we really kept things going in Pittsburgh because of that 2013 draft. That was a huge draft in building this roster back up to where it needs to be. So you go from there, and players that are going to make this roster, most likely, to players that have a long shot. They're a long shot to make this roster. Of course, I'm talking about undrafted rookie free agents. Let's run down the list of these guys quickly. Running back Curtis McNeil out of USC. Wide receiver J.D. Woods out of West Virginia. Wide receiver Reggie Dunn out of Utah. Tight end Peter Tuatupu out of San Jose State. Offensive tackle Mike Farrell out of Penn State. Offensive guard Christopher Hubbard out of Alabama Birmingham. Offensive guard Nick Embermake out of San Diego State. Offensive guard Mike Golick out of Notre Dame. Center Joe Madsen out of West Virginia. Cornerback Nigel Malone out of Kansas State. Linebacker Adam Baxter out of Northern Illinois. Linebacker Terrence Garvin out of West Virginia. Defensive end Brian Arnfelt out of Northwestern. Defensive tackle Cordian Higgins out of Louisiana Lafayette. Defensive tackle Omar Hunter out of Florida. And rounding out the group, long snapper Luke Ingram out of Hawaii. So you see the Pittsburgh Steelers very active here with the rookies. Don't know how many of these guys, if any, are going to make this roster, but again, when you're a team like the Steelers, anything's possible. Because, like I said before, the Steelers are a franchise that builds from within. If you're part of our foundation, if you're a part of our community, you got a shot. And these guys are all part of that Steelers family for the time being. They're in camp with them. They got a shot. They go out, they work hard, they outwork one of these aging veterans, or they outwork one of these younger players that's in their 3rd or 4th season. Who knows? Maybe they can crack this roster. We will see. But we transition from in with the new with the Pittsburgh Steelers to any philosophical change in Pittsburgh. So you look at any philosophical changes for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and frankly, there aren't going to be many. Same defensive coordinator in Dick LeBeau. He's been doing this for ages. I mean, this guy's well into his 70s, and he's still got the same intensity he had when he was a player probably 50 years ago. And so Dick LeBeau and his defense are going to keep on steamrolling. Doesn't matter how old the Steelers are. Doesn't matter how banged up they are. They always play tough defense. Simply put. You saw the Ravens struggle with defense last year, and they had a rash of injuries themselves. Steelers are the same way. They've dealt with injuries, but the only difference there is that the Steelers find a way to get it done. Next man up, they get it done on the defensive side of the football, and they did it again. They did it again in 2012. They really found a way to play solid defense. Now, were they the Pittsburgh Steelers defense that we've come accustomed to? No, because along with forcing teams to punt the football and being solid against the run and really being a team that is really sound on defense. Usually you get sacks and you get turnovers with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You get guys that are making plays. There was no Troy Polamalu. James Harrison was banged up. So was Lamar Woodley. So the pressure wasn't there in Pittsburgh. They weren't getting to the quarterback per se. And they weren't forcing as many turnovers as you've come accustomed to. And so that was the part that I think really hurt this team as well, aside from the injuries. And we've talked about that at great lengths in this very episode, how many injuries there were in 2012 to this football team, but defensively they still found a way to get it done. It just wasn't that Steeler way that we've been accustomed to seeing, forcing teams into mistakes and turning those mistakes into points and winning ball games. It just didn't happen for the Steelers in 2012, but I think the focus needs to be more so on this offense. I thought offensively, there was a different approach. We had a new offensive coordinator in 2012 in Todd Haley. He came on board, and his emphasis was on getting the football out of Ben Roethlisberger's hands quicker. And early on in the season, you saw that. I thought Roethlisberger actually had a pretty good game week 1 against the Denver Broncos. Peyton Manning's first game back, and I thought the Steelers had a shot. You make one mistake at the end of the game, did Roethlisberger, and the Broncos turn that into a pick six and win the football game. And I thought that the Steelers played well. And I thought that Roethlisberger showed a lot of what they had been working on in camp, getting the football out of his hands quickly. 3-step drop. Back foot hit the ground, ball comes out. And I thought they did that really well early on. And I thought toward the end of the season, Roethlisberger went back to his old ways of backyard football. Plays break down and he's scrambling around trying to find someone. And he was banged up. He couldn't be in a position to do that. He needed to stay in the pocket, find receivers, get the ball out of his hands quickly. And I just thought he made too many mistakes, did Ben Roethlisberger, in 2012. I think he put too much of the burden on his shoulders, and he was not healthy. He probably should not have been back. But when Charlie Batch and Byron Leftwich are your backups, you feel the need to have to come back because these guys aren't getting it done. They're either injured themselves or they're not producing. And one of the worst games I've seen the Steelers play in the last decade was that game against the Cleveland Browns where you turned it over maybe 8 times in that game. I mean, you can't win in this league when you turn the football over, let alone 8 times in one football game. And you still had an opportunity to win. That was the crazy part, was they needed every single one of those 8 turnovers to beat you, but you can't beat yourself in this league. And I thought that Roethlisberger sat back and watched games like that and said, I got to hurry back. And he wasn't healthy, and it showed, and he had some back-breaking interceptions last season. That interception against the Dallas Cowboys, that one hurt. That led to the game-winning field goal. Cowboys beat you in overtime. You could also point to the Antonio Brown fumble in that game. I think if Antonio Brown doesn't fumble, you win that game, and I think you win it. Not easily, but a lot more comfortably than having to go to overtime and ultimately lose the game on a Roethlisberger interception. You look at that Cincinnati Bengals game that sealed your fate. Roethlisberger makes a couple of mistakes in that game. The first one was the only touchdown in the game for the Cincinnati Bengals, in which Leon Hall gets a pick six. And then you look at the game-clinching interception to Reggie Nelson at the end of the game. That's something you can't have happen. Either that game needs to go to overtime or you need to win that game in regulation, but you can't throw a pick there. And Roethlisberger did it, set them up for the game-winning field goal, and that's the story of the 2012 Pittsburgh Steelers. Not enough turnovers forced on the defensive side, too many turnovers on the offensive side of football. And you didn't know what you were getting from the Steelers in 2012. This is a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type of football team. You lose to the Oakland Raiders, but yet you can beat the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore. You lose to the San Diego Chargers, who were hapless in 2012, yet you go to Cincinnati and beat the Cincinnati Bengals, another postseason participant. So you didn't know what you were getting from this team in the Pittsburgh Steelers from week to week. You just didn't. And you need more consistency. You need guys to stay healthy. Man, you can't have the rash of injuries you had a season ago. But not a lot is changed in terms of philosophy. Todd Haley is still going to preach getting the football out of Ben Roethlisberger's hands quickly. Get it out of your hands. Don't hold on to the ball. That's when injuries happen to you. When you hold on to the ball too long, and look, Ben Roethlisberger only knows one way to play. And so it's like trying to teach an old dog new tricks. You just can't do it. Roethlisberger is a guy that wants to extend plays, that wants to never give up on a play. And sometimes it backfires on him, but we'll see how this team fares in 2013. But tell you what, if they can just stay healthy, relatively healthy, Steelers are going to be a dangerous team because they always are a dangerous team. And that's one thing you can count on in Pittsburgh. And so that's what's new in Pittsburgh.
Like the content? Want more? Sub up.